Well, friends, here we are in the Hermitage. We are already here at the entrance. We will wait for our guide now. Of course, the views are fascinating. The hall is very huge and beautiful. Well, friends, these are the incredible views that open up. Now we are following the guide, and I hope she will tell us something interesting. I hope it won't interfere with our shooting. And then we were not happy about something.
Our first stop is the landing of the stairs. Please sit opposite me. Done. We are on the main grand staircase of the Winter Palace, and from this staircase, all the highest guests who first got an audience with the Russian monarchs began to get acquainted with the palace, and in general, from all over the Russian Empire, the staircase should have immediately knocked down with its magnificent wealth. The construction of the residence begins in 1754th year, by order of the equal daughter of Peter the Great, but on the site of the ceremonial residence already existing at that time. In other words, this building is not being built from scratch. The previous Winter Palace was left to Taunt Petrov-Anna. This is a partially wooden building. The construction of buildings of different times, both were in order, and in general, a large-scale reconstruction is being conceived. The Italian architect French is invited to shoot me on the sides. Elizabeth Petrovna is ready for any restrictions, as long as the palace is rebuilt as soon as possible. He even agrees to live in a small, well, by the standards of the Empress, in a small wooden palace on Nevsky Prospect. If only the construction would be completed faster. The architect will give only one task, so that the new residence, in terms of splendor, wealth, will outshine everything already existing at that time in the Russian Empire. Australia, brilliant in every sense of the word, solves this problem. Chooses a luxurious, lush, spectacular Baroque style, but Baroque with a certain amount of changes. Because in Europe, if you remember what the Baroque looks like, there is a heavy pile of volumes, heavy gloomy spaces, a lot of additional details. There is a lightened space here, 22 meters, and you want to be here and admire all this splendor. It all needs to be properly illuminated. The windows of the second and third tier, but in fact, there are not so many real windows. Actually, there are several windows above us in the courtyard, but everything else is a mirror of deception. That is, the light is reflected in the mirrors, and there is no need to use additional ceiling lighting on the ceiling. Instead, the fluffed-up painting is the progress of the work of the 18th century artist Gasparaziani, the Olympic gods at the heavenly gathering. It's a pity he won't have time to see all this magnificently. No matter how she hurried the great architect to the end of construction, she did not wait. On the morning of the third, we do not take into account especially, so the first real housewives of the Winter Palace will be Catherine II, except the Winter Palace will become the main ceremonial residence, but only for the winter period, hence the name. Why do they say winter? Because they lived here in winter, and in summer they went to country summer palaces. And the stairs have this name in terms of functionality. The highest guests went up to the reception of the Russian emperors. The highest foreign guests were foreign ambassadors. The staircase was called the main or embassy staircase. And along this staircase, the ceremonial exit on the Feast of Epiphany was solemnly completed, when the entire royal family descended from the palace church, went out on the Neva embankment of Nikon from this side. The ice was not cut down. They bought a special form and or dye, and the whole family was present during the rite of lighting the water in the Neva. Naturally, no one plunged into the ice hole, but it is such an important element of palace etiquette that the stairs came up with the name Jordanian, and it has been preserved throughout the Soviet era, despite the fact that it has such a religious background and is so very careful to apply, regardless of the historical political context. Well, actually, we are now starting to march along the front porch, as it was customary at the end of the 18th. At the beginning of the 19th century, when the highest guest of the imperial family solemnly passed through the suite of state halls and went to the reception of the Russian emperor. We will pass them now. You will get there. We walked into this hall, and it immediately became obvious how much fashion is changing in the Brotherhood of Interiors, how different interiors can look built very close in time. Naturally, with the accession of Empress Catherine, the space of the Winter Palace begins to change, and many things are being rebuilt inside, and the Empress changes everything according to her ideas about beauty. Fashion under Catherine includes a strict restrained style in height. Upset, there was no place in the new fashion. He was first sent on a long vacation. Then a letter was written on this vacation. The yard no longer needs those who treated him in this way. The Winter Palace is not preserved in the appearance in which it will be arranged. Upset, every imperial generation adds something new to the Brotherhood of the Winter Palace. Wasn't the first one. The Winter Palace is not upset. I'll tell you later why this happened. But first let's ask a logical question. And why do we need a front lining in the palace? Well, that is, if we want to organize an official reception of the melting of European states or foreign ambassadors. Why is this long procession in the ceremonial Ancelot? Why can't she be invited to an official ceremony right away? Does Nicholas I see this question in his own way? The ceremonial suite is such a visual tour without words. We tell something new about the Russian Empire through the interiors, through semantic accents in each hall. When the guests approach the big hall, they, first of all, have tuned in a certain way, and secondly, they already know a lot about the strengths of the Russian Empire, and everything begins, of course, watching the art, Field Marshal's Hall, and the ceremonial Lada here in the form in which we see it now. This is the brainchild of Nicholas I. Felmashevsky Hall. 6 field marshal portraits were ordered to be placed in this hall by Nicholas I. Even Running got acquainted with the story. He tells us that Masha is more than 6. 6 people. These are the ones who, in all other things, ran away with merit. The prefix was given. She was talking about the main battle for territorial gains, actually, the blush. Tarik Potemkin is the second person in the empire, after Catherine II. The Slavic Suvorov Roman Prince Elievich, Zaboltansky, Paskovich, and Rivansky. But have you noticed the most attentive thing? And there are more portraits. There is also a large portrait of Prince Jinstein. Obviously, he doesn't fit into the niche for which he was supposed to, in which he should have been more than everyone else. Such images of the Northern War are not suitable in this sense at all. Under Nicholas I there were 6 portraits and 2 empty niches. The fact that the story ends around my neck, on the ground, it remains just to wait for their appearance. And the seats for them have already been taken away. Well, actually, it's not a film of the Marshal's title. There is no Russian variant now. So in the 2012 year, there was a complete reconstruction here. In this hall, its former decoration was restored, and, among other things, suitable portraits were added. We didn't wait. There was no last name, but we came up and finished the semantic series. You may notice that in this huge hall, we do not see very important utilitarian, everyday details. There are huge interiors here. In the Winter Palace, as we all know, they lived in winter, and for something important it was at home. Absolutely right. No oven. Sometimes players say, do you even have a battery here? No heat source. When shooting, as if the Winter Palace was being built, everything was first. There were stoves, there were fireplaces. But let me tell you, we are talking about a city that claims to be the European capital. After all, the oven. We are talking about a fireplace. It is very impressive, very convenient, but not very functional. The heat is still burning, catching up further with the source of cold cheers. In general, we all do not idealize a winter palace for ourselves. Instead, it is very cold. The temperature never rises above 18 degrees in the halls. It is very dark in the halls, because the chandelier lights only in informal receptions very drill candles. And every time a conversation begins about the modernization of the heating system, everything rests on this fear. Everyone is afraid of fires. That wooden floors, wooden bags, draping fabrics with walls, on a spark and a fire starts. What were you afraid of? What happened? 1837th year. December night, just before Christmas. Already in the living quarters of the Winter Palace, there are Christmas trees dressed up. This is the first year when they ordered to put up Christmas trees in the palace. But a chimney fire starts in this hall. The spark flew out, hit the wooden structures, smoldered for a long time. The fire commission found no reason to worry, because there is little smoke in the first floor of the palace kitchen. And when it became clear that the fire had started, there was no time to save the Highlander. The palace burned more dawn from all points more. I don't like to say the word just in this context, but for such a large-scale fire, 5 human victims is not as much as it could be. Nicholas I naturally orders the butlers to restore, in the shortest history. Well, I think that if you have been on sightseeing tours of the city, or are in principle familiar with the pace of construction in St. Petersburg, you have heard the phrase the shortest pace of St. Petersburg more than once. This is practically the norm, and really in the shortest possible time, because Prilazala Petrovna, we built on our own, and here, and since you have a commission, there is more obvious work. They coped not in 8, but in 15, only it's not summer month. In 15 months, in less than 2 years, it is impossible to rebuild from scratch. Why do I always tell it for a long time, and you have a question, and that is why there are no cells at train stations. And will you see such specific grilles in the walls? This is part of the heating system, hidden inside the walls. All the stoves are in the basements. The dark air comes through a hidden system. The total length of these channels, hidden inside the walls of the museum, is more than 40 kilometers. The system has never worked since the 19th century. He still feels great. The only thing is that the furnaces were changed on the electronic system. That's it. That's the end of the long monologue. Then we'll go faster, don't worry. In the next hall, we will make a stop for all the rules of friends. We have today the last sightseeing tour for today, so the only thing I will ask is to stand along the fence, so that there is a passage behind your backs. It is narrow enough in the next hall, so that we do not create a traffic jam. And let's talk about the next hall. And again, we keep the front one firm flood in our head. This is a visual tour. The Field Marshal's Hall is the foreman of the Russian army. The next room, I think.
What? It is possible with the name.
They're sitting here. Yes, look. The very hall that raises the largest number of questions. Because it looks huge. We cannot be such an obvious chamber friend of the hall. It is decorated completely in the wrong style, not in the style of the person to whom it is dedicated. Dedicated to Peter the Great. We all remember perfectly well that Peter the Great has never been to the palace. The number is 30 years old, and the construction has begun. That is, there is a palace in it. By the way, I've never seen my own portrait either. It was written 5 years after the emperor's death. There are too many questions in this hall. If you don't know that this is not a hall, this is a monument. Monuments are equal to the first one. Nicholas ordered to perpetuate the memory of the first Russian emirate in this way. Troll receptions have never been held here. Here the emperor received gifts for the Christmas holidays of foreign ambassadors for such a choice. It was very impressive. On the walls of the Ala silk velvet lion manufactory are made specially by order of the imperial court. Velvet is very effectively combined with silver above and gold-silver threads. The above is done separately in yellow and sewn on top of the tank. The embroidery is very correct, but it shows that it has been preserved in an original way since the middle of the 19th century. It was quite carefully restored at the Hermitage School of Restoration, but here, well, accordingly, there are no questions. But in too bright, but could not have been preserved with 170 years of history in this form. But I won't deceive you here. This velvet has been restored, because in the year 2012, a decision was made to restore it here. Velvet on Bart and light pink fabric. Almost lost course. But, in my opinion, not the Hermitage. Just ordered on his. They ordered there the same French texture in the city that 200 years ago, that is, it exists, and the original terminology has not been preserved, so the hall was restored. This is exactly what Nicholas I looked like, the most intimate hall of the parade. In his head. The largest and probably one of the most luxurious halls of the Grand Flood. Its area is more than 1,000 square meters. The hall is designed in the classical style. The style is very strict, perfect symmetry, usually marble, one-tone, two-tone design. There are practically no decorating details. In other words, The hall should have initially looked like a Feldmashevsky, and he was like that before the fire, while Nikolai I, who goes to work every day at a construction site, inspects all this equipment, interferes with the drawings, participates in the creation of his house, his space. He clarifies the architect how the new hall and the largest hall of the grand suite will look like. They explain to him what he will look like, really two-tone marble decoration. The emperor speaks delicately. Let's think again about the design of this hall and the largest front hall. Poor, but grandiose. This is a grandiose hall, completely gilded, bypassing all style rules. Gilding is never used. That is, columns, chandeliers, everything is covered with the thinnest layer of gold leaf. The thickness of the gold coating here is several microns. It's thinner than a human voice. There are only 8 kilograms of precious metal for the entire huge hall. And now we are coming back to this idea again, which will please you to invest visual excursions. We are well aware that this is a story about wealth. Here is 8 kilograms of gold for the Russian Empire, a story about wealth. Of course not. If you look carefully at the chandeliers, on the lower circle near the inflorescence of the lamps, you will see on each chandelier bronze gilded coats of arms of all the largest provincial cities. It demonstrates the wealth of territories, that the Russian Empire is the most urbanized country of the 19th century. Each hall in the Grand Suite had its own purpose. Various delegations were received in each hall. Representatives of the provincial nobility were received here, that is, in fact, governors and their immediate entourage and their families. They could find the city of their province, feel that they were really waiting for them in the palace, preparing. Agree. It is very symbolic that we have not yet entered, and our foreign ambassadors have already had a good tour. They have already shown a lot, and there is something to be proud of. Before inviting the holy saint to a small screen hall, it remains far from about the main military victory since the 19th century. The victory over Napoleon. This is the liberation of Europe. I will tell you about it in detail from the Gallery 1812. We have a huge route ahead of us, so while there is such an opportunity, please do not use it. Sit on the banks, choose only one side. And here, by the way, while you are sitting down, you can pay attention their modern metal grille of the ventilation and heating system, and next to it a brass one that has been preserved since the 19th century. These are the grilles. Such stranglers, or rather, were in all the halls of the Winter Palace. The gallery is dedicated to the victory of the Russian army in the war with Napoleon in 1812, in memory of the liberation campaigns in Europe. At the entrance and exit from the gallery in 1813-14th years, the years of liberation campaigns, and the gallery is built on the following principle. If our guests are foreign delegation, take even the shortest route, they literally go through one door and go out into another. And they don't even make a stop here. They already grasp all the main semantic elements at a glance. That is, for them, the gallery opens up completely at once. In the most honorable place in the gallery, the Tsar Liberator Alexander I, in a white manner, on the right left hand of the emperor. The main allies are the King of Prussia, the Emperor of Austria, the largest military leaders in full height. I think that neither Mikhail Kutuzov nor Mikhail Bogdanovich Barclay de Tolly need a separate presentation in the context of the War of the 12th year. On the contrary, there are portraits of the emperor's own brother Constantine Pavlovich, and in line with him, the Duke of Wellington, the hero of the Battle of Waterloo, and the only foreign field marshal in the Russian army. Countless portraits. Alexander I will personally compile lists of those whose names are represented in the gallery. He understands perfectly well that it is impossible to accommodate all the war heroes here. There are not enough walls with just winter palaces. Therefore, there are only generals here, those who received the rank of general either before the start of the war or since the 14th. From the 12th to the 14th year, there are no random post-war names here. All the emperor's surnames are approved personally. The lists are colossal. 332 portraits. I think the portrait of the sovereign emperor is probably the most responsible order. And all these portraits are made by one person. English artist George Dow will be working on the creation of this gallery for 10 years. Its peculiarity is that most of the portraits painted in the personal presence of the heroes, they came to pose for the artist's studio. Sometimes, in rare cases, an existing family portrait was sent, if it was not possible to come. And this is the main advantage of the gallery, but you can pay attention that the galleries from the bushes of frames did not have time to paint 13 portraits. The heroes died before it was possible to create their portraits. There were no pre-war portraits in the families. One portrait refused to pose. His face was so badly disfigured in the war that he did not want to be captured in this form. Apparently, it just came out to cross out military trash from the list. Of course, this is impossible. Therefore, by order of the emperor, such a frame was tightened with a green ship. A name and rank were applied to the frame, as if there was a portrait inside, and thus they gave the last tribute to the fallen, and the temple here is 13. We also talked in detail about the fire. So the fire happened when the gallery was already open. The portraits were on the walls. The fire spread mainly through wooden attics and ceilings. That is, you can understand how quickly it reached this gallery. Not a single portrait of the gallery was damaged during the fire. This was a special merit of the honor guard. At the risk of their own lives, they took out every single portrait on the snow of the palace square, and in the general confusion of the fire, not a single portrait was lost. They were carefully preserved, and after the restoration of the gallery returned to their places. This speaks very well about what significance this gallery really had for its contemporaries. But from the point of view of the ceremony, there will no longer be a high point. Then the guests are invited by Saint Suga. We are going to the big pros.
Excuse me.
The most important hall and all the most important state decrees were announced. The highest guests of the new caravans were received. They were not held. For this there were temples of the Moscow Kremlin. And here absolutely every belt, do not exaggerate, is a separate work. On the walls you can see white Arabic marble. This marble, as humanity has known for more than 2,000 years. The towns of Carrara are not far from Rome. Marble, which is famous for its whiteness, density, and ease of working with this stone in the deposits for 2,000 years, is gradually fading and less large pans are found. It is possible to remove them from the ground. Well, it's supposed to be here, completed. They do not make up the ships that we have from Italy. Here the ceiling makes an impression with its appearance alone. Even if you don't know, it's an engineering miracle. This is a bronze pendant, because in all wooden floors in the yard, after the fire, it was possible to forget forever. We can see the effective part in the attic. This is a miracle for engineers, because it is a rafter system, that is, literally a spider web, has seen the highest quality, so that the ceiling does not collapse. From the weight of the chandelier, they weigh more than 1.5 tons in total. But once in the history of the palace it happened. Almost immediately after the completion of construction work, they made mistakes in calculations. The beams could not withstand such a weight. The chandeliers began to gradually deform and then completely collapsed at night. The air currents knocked out the door to the pose of get out of this hall. But this one happened at night. Escape the human card. The only thing I had to redo the concert hall. And I had to redo the parquet as well. The pattern on the parquet is almost completely combined with the pattern on the ceiling, quite a popular story in classicism, where the theme of symmetry is very important, sometimes from a mirror image. And there are 16 rare types of wood, including black woods, mahogany. These breeds are distributed as precious breeds. This is a very subtle and complex work, down to a literal work of art, that has been preserved under our feet unchanged. The parquet that remembers after about the emperor, and the ceremonies took place in this hall. When the emperor left through the window of these doors, ascended to the throne seat, the number of steps leading to the throne place has no sacred significance. Everything is strictly mathematical, calculated based on the size of the hall. That is, in whatever part of the hall the guests were, no matter how many avengers were here, and the throne was always clearly visible. My words are easily verified about the season. Since he took it off here, He has teeth in this hall, and indeed the throne is always very clearly visible, and the guests have always been able to see the throne but not the real emperor sitting on the throne next to him, because we imagine a ceremony when the emperor sits on the throne, out of respect for the assembled guests present. The ceremony will fall standing for several hours. I took off the assumed, and from the emperor, a lot of effort. But we can also afford what the guests could not afford.
Closer.
And arrange some more old ones. And a small floor is a floor. Suspiciously similar throne. We've already seen exactly the same one a few minutes ago, so you and I have seen a copy of the throne that Pavel I ordered for himself as a copy of Anna's throne. And this is the throne. This is the most priceless original. This is the throne that Anna orders in her coronation from the London master Nicholas Clausen. The master is very unusual. He is both things and, it would seem, a profession, and do not combine with each other. It turns out a piece of jewelry art furniture. The throne is not entirely made of gold. It was made of comfort, so it is oak. Silver hammered plates are fixed on it. The crown is on the back. Gold and silver threads are embroidered behind it on the inhale. We have already seen this embroidery technology when you take literally two threads. The wool or silk thread of the base is intertwined with each other, on which the thinnest gold or silver wire is wound. Imagine what kind of wire should be thick, so that it can be wound on a silk thread like a flagellum, and ironed by hand millimeter by millimeter. A luxurious velvet canopy, a magnificent throne. Visitors of the Soviet State Hermitage were deprived of all this, because it was impossible to imagine such a symbol of autocracy in this hall after the revolution. First, the front part of the canopy is removed for a long time, the upper part as the most politically neutral. There is a lot of talk about what kind of exposition to do here and whether it should be done, because on the one hand, such exhibition areas are idle, and on the other hand, then it is necessary to solve the problem of the head of eagles appearing in the most unexpected places in this hall. Then it will probably be seriously applied to the museum, but in fact, no exposition will be taken here. Believe me, she is here now. Carved stone vases in the wall between the columns opposite the windows. This is an exposition of the 18th-19th century stone-cut eyes. No one ever notices her. So luxurious interiors by themselves. This was understood by the Soviet experts of the Friends of the Mood, so they decided to leave the hall free. But here it was necessary to put 48. Here appears, what did you think? And they make it out of precious, semi-precious stones. It becomes such an encyclopedia of Soviet gems. It was originally made for the World's Fair in Paris in the 37th year. This is the exhibition where the Soviet Union was represented by a statue of a working focus. Well, the statue remained in Moscow, somehow placed in the Hermitage. She was here until the 85th year. You know, in an amazing way, it fit in here very well. That is, it was in harmony with this hall as much as possible, and now it is the central one of the Chernyshov Geological and Exploration Museum, and, of course, it looks more logical there. We got acquainted with the ceremonial part of the palace grounds, but the Hermitage of the ceremonial conference is not exhausted. First of all, it's now with you to talk less and less about the palace, and talk more and more about museums. Because we are literally going to the Hermitage deposits with you as ideas, we will talk about jokes, under what circumstances, and how ideas about collecting the ceremonial residence of Russian monarchs appear. To do this, we leave the palace and go to Our route is quite extensive, so some spaces will have to pass without stopping. Unfortunately, it is absolutely impossible to cover the entire palace, the entire museum, even with a cursory glance. But in a nutshell, I will tell you what we see now, passing through the western gallery of the small Hermitage. This is an exposition of medieval art, entirely assembled by one person, Alexander Petrovich, cut with all possible help. And I adore you, servants, they will go terrible collectors, enthusiastic lovers of medieval culture. Let's think logically. Where you, being great amateurs, experts in the Middle Ages, see this medieval with buyers collecting. Of course, not in Russian strawberries. Obviously, to Europe. And Alexander Petrovich still has a very suitable professional diplomat. Alexander III gives him the opportunity to serve in Paris, and they make up a fantastic collection in terms of quality and value. Beautiful carved bone, magnificent objects of church use and church furniture, beautiful youthful enamels, stunning in their beauty, objects of the church storm, and the two of them decide to give the whole collection to the 19th. But again, the logical question is that enthusiastic collectors who have been in respect for this collection all their lives should sell the collection. Saving, well, in general, on the one hand, yes, preserving the integrity of the collection, because they begin a very serious process in the life of two spouses, divorce proceedings. They look good, and before they do this, they think everything over and put the whole collection up for auction. Alexander III will not allow any auction to take place. He's trying entirely. By offering the amount 3 times more, a colleague becomes real. We're coming out of the West Gallery. There's the North one. Please. Boys, boys. Contact us. Well, if we have already started a conversation with you about unique acquisitions and wonderful gifts, here is one of them in front of you. One of the most famous exhibits of the Hermitage is a luxurious Pavlik watch, and one of the most luxurious gifts that Catherine II ever receives in her life. No, well, we are like this. This watch will be presented to Ekaterina by Potemkin, Tarik Potemkin. I promised that we would remember about him at least once more. Well, actually, in the context of one of the first and second persons of the state, closest to the Empress. We will probably call him that. He orders in London, but at that time Master James Hobbs had such an amazing clockwork. Naturally, it is completely disassembled from the womb of Petersburg. Here, a representative of the company gathers it on the spot and demonstrates the presentation to the sovereign. What does this mechanical control include? The sphere moves by itself, opens, closes its eyes, touches its paws, a melody written by the English composer John Stanley plays, and then a peacock opens its luxurious tail, turns around. From all sides of the peacock, you can see that the feathers on the other side are silvered. The peacock is proud. She will not stand in front of you, revealing himself in all his glory. He gathers his tail, bows with the bones of his metal neck, turns his head to the right and to the left, and the latter enters the soul. The cockerel serves several times loudly and to Rick. Listen, I'm telling you in parallel. You can watch on the screen. The recording was made specifically for this. And here, in fact, everything ends with this harness. The luxurious gift of the Empress, with great love, asks to start again and again. Again and again. At some point, the mechanism does not stand up, it breaks down. It is reassembled anew, changing part of the gears and modifying the mechanism. Russian self-taught mechanic Ivan Petrovich Kulibin. At the moment, thanks to Kulibin, this is the only watchmaker in the world. But now you will see the clock, actually the dial itself. Pay attention to the cap of the largest mushroom. Dragonfly is a second hand, golden Roman, and white Arabic numerals, hours and minutes. As soon as the dragonfly makes a full turn, it means that a minute has passed. Here it is this big mushroom in the very center, at the foot of the spirit. So it is thanks to Kulibin that this is the only watchmaker in the world that has remained unchanged. James Box's infusion, which has remained unchanged since the 18th century. The watch is still functioning. They still show the time exactly, but once a week, and without fail they start it, because it is literally a living organism. It cannot be started often, And too rarely, too, it is impossible, because the mechanism must be in operation. A magnificent luxury gift Potemkin makes very effectively, but it's also in his corporate style. For example, he will offer to place this clock, not here, in the Winter Palace at that time. Even the small Hermitage is not yet fully equipped, but his residence in the Tauride Palace, where the Empress. What difference does it make where it will stand? You have little room in the palace for such a huge clockwork, and in the Tauride Palace you can leave it in Waldo. Actually, this was done. Until Potemkin's death, this watch was kept in his residence, although it was a gift with the strokes of the Empress. After Potemkin's death, Catherine buys this watch from the family of the blind prince as her own gift. And what do you think? Leaves Potemkin together again. And after the death of Catherine herself, these watches were moved to the residence at the insistence of Pavel Perv, as they say, learn and Potemkin how to make gifts on the eve of the holidays, a very useful skill. But in a logical way, the question arises, why can't you immediately place the wolf here? But there's plenty of room here. Under Catherine, there was no single space of the hall. There were several small living rooms. Let's move to another part of the hall. Look from a different angle. Pay attention to the view from the window. It's not very many years to talk about it for a long time, but it's clear that the window is not illuminated. But we really invite our guests to come back here in the spring, when the first flowers will bloom here. And it doesn't really fit with what floor we are on right now. We're on the second one. We went up the Barden stairs and never went down. The view from the window cannot be on the garden at the window level if it were not a hanging garden. This is one of the little wonders of the world. Well, rather, it resembles those soaring, hanging in the air gardens of Queen Semiramis. But if for Semiramis it was a whim and a whim, then for Catherine it was a very functional solution, because the Empress has a very serious problem. The Winter Palace is surrounded on all sides. There are no parks, there is no place of solitude either. But there is a summer garden, a public city park. It doesn't really look like an Empress's walk. So it's worth arranging this chamber space. The two galleries are connected by the southern pavilion in the distance and the northern one, in which we are with you. That is, you are taken out, closed from all four sides of the space. On the ground floor, under the palace roof of the Meneshi, here on the roof of the stables, is broken by a hanging glorious system of water temperature maintenance. Why do you maintain the temperature, you ask? We have a glass roof, a greenhouse, steel trees, or peacocks strolled in paradise, the pride of the Empress. This is recommended to those peacocks who are here now, but under Nicholas I, and the garden will be rebuilt, made more regularly and more suitable for that time, and builds entirely. If you then moved in your own apartment, in your own house, you know, the first thing is not to demolish the load-bearing walls. Actually, the walls are separated by the output, and no one demolishes. Just along with the wall, blue polos appeared on one side. On the other hand, it is divided into several equal parts. There were beans, a masquerade. We could go up to the second floor, walk in half to Vlad on the second floor in the same hall. They could go out into the garden, they could breathe fresh air. Because it is very important, if we take into account that it is not the light bulbs in the luxurious chandeliers that are lit, but the candles, how quickly they burn out all the oxygen in this room, how quickly you raise the temperature here to such a magnitude that I will faint not from the father of feelings, not from the views of Valia, and the opportunity during the score. It's a very functional story. The whole is very impressive. This is very difficult for an architect. This is a combination of incongruous. There is an Italian Renaissance, an Arabic on the second floor, and Venice with luxurious crystal, an Irian mosaic in the center. Mosaics are the muses of the pure masters of the middle 19th century, and they copy the Roman original. While growing up near a public city bar, a larger fora comes in. Here is the original is, as if made of colored and transparent color. It's called. Here, the dimensions of the PC are large enough, and tightly considered. They are very elegantly folded in the middle of the picture. They are quite clearly visible, and if you pay your attention to exactly the same mosaic pattern, that is, they literally rhyme with each other in microtechnics, then if you look closely, you will not see here, even in some places, where one element of the mosaic ends and another begins. I'm sorry, but I can't highlight this for you out of respect and safety, the importance of preserving the exhibits. But it really seems that these are microscopic pieces of the same smalt painted with a brush, and this is a very, very fine work. And in this space, in one of these living rooms, the history of the Hermitage begins. Literally, the museum is born here, in one of the living rooms. The Empress arranges chamber evenings, where conversations about the most interesting topics for her in the circle of her closest ones are no more than 20 people. Conversations about modern political trends, maybe about modern architecture, about painting, about sculpture, about poetry, and Ekaterina can boast and demonstrate to a narrow circle of her confidants the first paintings that she buys into her personal collection of paintings. And these collections were originally called the Hermitage. The Hermitage, translated from French, is a secluded corner or a hermit's shelter. And here are the hermitages. There are such chamber rooms, small living rooms or pavilions in parks, or generally in all official palace rooms everywhere. This is a way to retire and be in the circle of the most public. And at the end of 18 kilometers, in the Hermitage, that is, in this living room, the paintings no longer fit, and it becomes too much. The largest collection of paintings in Europe do not fit in the entire pavilion, do not fit into parallel galleries. In general, the small Hermitage no longer receives paintings. How to build a new building. The Hermitage will rise big. We move on to the third task. Pay attention to the view of Vasilyevsky Island, the junction of the most luxurious views of St. Petersburg. Look at how the same bridges transitions are arranged on your right hand. You can understand that there is nothing under us, but we literally go from one building to another on the second floor along the bridge of the transition. We come out of the installation itself. We do. What you need to know about yours, first of all, none of ours is because the same guests. They are related to each other. Confluent on the walls as decorations. We hang in the collection of paintings of the emperor. Second, the paintings that you have made now and the decoration of these halls now do not correspond to the modern lecture. When Catherine was here, for example, there was a billiard room. They stood like a terrible person. Now there is an exposition of the Italian Renaissance, approximately in the collection in the High Renaissance. Who is the Renaissance? The names should be. Something is being revived, decorated since the Dark Ages, in the form of antiquity. What has the mask figure achieved? The highest, flawlessly correct human construction. Among his tasks is to subtly and accurately depict the image of a person. Gradually they return to the fact that the person is closed. This person is the right environment in the household. Perspective on the volume of space, chiaroscuro. But we know all that we have classic fat. The work, we see at least something from what I will list, is still a very medieval work. These are the 13 Western and Eastern traditions that we have not yet moved away from. Therefore, conscious reproduction is very recognizable. Shame on us, the OWL Foundation scolds all possibilities, prospects, images of people are not yet as harmoniously correct as we will see in 100 years. Literally, a carbon monoxide image is allowed. Behind me, the baby in Maria's arms doesn't even look like a child. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that a child does not differ from an adult in anything but size. To write in a special way, the artist is standing on it. What is the task? It's important.
To her.
And the image is very similar to the Orthodox Jewish master, and the 14th year will only take 100 years. The first thing to answer is the correct product. This is not a picture familiar to the understanding of this word. It's a mural, the fresco. We are well aware of this painting on the raw plaster inside the space, there or the monastery. Very rarely we meet them in a museum. Usually this space becomes a museum abruptly. It does not change its place. Here, the monastery, which was established in the 15th century, fell into decline in the 19th century and was supposed to be destroyed, and the mural was cut out along with a piece of the wall. So it is still on display here. And look how the painting has changed. Maria is already a perfect beauty. The baby in his arms looks like a child, and the artist is very interested in how to properly arrange sweet clothes on Mary's lap so that it is clear in what position and how she sits, how to cover the baby's legs with a transparent cloth. The figures of saints are still very medieval traditions painted. They look more like two columns with slits flutes. Such slits were made in ancient Greece, in ancient Rome, to add the harmony of the column. Everything is very logical. At this time, such columns are taken out of the ground during archaeological excavations. And these forms, they are inspired. But what's new here? The saints are already two different people. Saint Dominic led an ascetic lifestyle. Please, look at the dark cheeks in the floor, dark circles under the eyes, the look of a person immersed in prayer. Saint Thomas is the complete opposite. The young one has floated by. The look is more immersed in his own thoughts. There is one important medieval technique here. Probably you didn't notice it right away. As soon as you see it, the picture will not be different for you. You will never look at her in any other way. Imagine if Mary strictly stands up, she will become almost twice as tall as the saints who are now standing next to the media, and they seem to have a head. Actually, the solution to such specifics is an explanation of why the rule fluid is needed. After all, this is essentially a Bible for the poor. These are the plots said in the most understandable language for those who do not know how to read. They can get acquainted in a different way in the Bible. And looking at this drawing, at this image, they immediately understand who is portraying what role here, who has what status on the image. The artist Fra Beata Angelica, with a gentle and euphonious name in the 30s of the 15th century, creates this amazing work. Literally 2 generations will pass, a little more than 50 years, and we were already talking about a completely different artist, an artist who will become an all in the summer of the Renaissance, because he combines several professions at once. How much? Mathematician, philosopher, inventor, but not an artist. Throughout his life, this master will never call himself an artist. He will consider painting too sacred. And who is he? A simple craftsman with a small town of Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci is the main jewel of the Hermitage's Italian collection. These are 2 paintings by Leonardo. Even the sum, for example, you see here is a hat. In the world, a lot. or a little, it's up to you, but there are several inputs. The paintings were not signed at that time. Since the Middle Ages, it has been considered who an artist is, so that his name is adjacent to the image of saints or God. Elena Vladimirovna, do you want to come here? Elena Vladimirovna, let's change. She will be so logical and start. This is the first painting at the time of writing. This is the second. We didn't even succeed very much. So, the paintings are not signed, and besides, Leonardo puts the painting on such a high pedestal that they begin to copy it. They copy not what kind of work, the way of thinking, what the artist puts into his works, and therefore it is very difficult to attribute them. But both Madonnas by Leonard are mentioned in his list of paintings that he carries with him from place to place. We know exactly what exactly these works were under. Plus, a fairly large number of preparatory drawings have been preserved. We have no doubt that these friendly pictures belong to Leonardo's truths. Yes, Leonardo has been here for 26 years. He has just finished his training in his teacher's workshop. He takes the first independent steps in painting. He chooses the most common plot, the tone of the baby, or without squeaks about everything. It's almost a revolution in painting. If there was a minima on Mary's head of the baby Jesus, we would not have thought that a young mother was with her while you were playing plum. Long-awaited stretches out a flower to the baby. The baby presses his mother's hand. It seems that the world around these two does not exist. The young man no longer looks like a small adult. Ka is soft, the way a child should be, and Maria looks very unusual. She is dressed in the fashion of that time, as modern Leonardo Dutches looked like, who walked along the same streets with him. I have a fashionable dress, a fashionable hairstyle, incredible detailing. You can count the pearls into a very fashionable and very expensive brooch. It's just coming into fashion. This is a rhinestone framed with pearls. There is fantastic detail of Leonard's experimenters, and all the time there is still something new. This painting was painted in a very unusual way up to that time, with oil paint. For us, oil paint is directly associated with painting. At that time, oil paint is written only in the Netherlands. Leonardo borrows it and creates such subtle details that you can admire. From Florence, where the Madonna Mino was painted, comes to Milan, where the Madonna Litta is written. Such personal names of the painting are Madonna, Madonna Litta. This is the name of the family in which the image of Putin has been stored for a long time. It gave birth to the family saint, Petersburg architect Vina. The wine was literally hanging in the apartment on Vasilyevsky Island, and it was a family relita. And this is Natchez. Acquires earlier, in 1865th year, and this is an impoverished control snail, which was taken out all over Europe to justify that without the strain of his family, just literally forced him to sell several family ones, and one of which is the Madonna from Leonardo, and here is a completely different life. With the naked eye, it is clear that this paint is different. This is tempera. Tempera is the paint of the eternal yoke on it. It is empty. It is almost impossible to glorify a viscous one. That is, most often each subsequent smear is placed next to the previous ones. Look at Maria's porcelain skin. They and the baby seem to be one, as if they are a marble statue. Under the fingers, the baby's infant skin is not even squeezed through. That is, as if they were carved out of a single monolith of stone. Look at this plastic lapel to the cloaks, that we will stretch out our hand and feel the cold breath, and not a single separate smear is visible. This is a unique painting technique. Imagine how difficult it is to write a transparent ribbon of fabric when you do not have the opportunity to apply one picturesque layer on the top. Another tempera dries for a very long time. It is almost impossible. In other words, all the strokes are calculated with mathematical precision to create the effect of transparent fabric, but also business cards on Nargo forever, heavy eyes bulging out from under half-lowered eyelids, a slight half-smile. Either he's smiling or he's not. The whole world. What does that famous smile of the Gioconda mean? Another masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci. And that's where the image is made. It's for strategies. In fact, let me remain a patriot of my museum in which I work. We have just such a picturesque technique, and it is presented more complex, more spectacular. Just like that, spread it out. So popularize, although this picture can probably be called a folk one, because I'm sure that many people associate it with something at home. For example, my grandparents, she stood in the sideboard as an icon. Well, because she is really associated with the icon much more than this playful, lively image, Madonna and Child, Madonna Benoit. And speaking of Leonardo Hive, it is impossible not to say about his school. This is Leonardo's inner circle. These are the ones who copy his techniques and techniques. It's Leonardo with us. In no way do I want to say that the paintings presented in this hall, in terms of quality or their characteristics, are Da Vinci's billion. It's just that these paintings, in principle, could not have appeared if Leonardo had not painted his Madonnas. Don't write Leonardo Jakin. We very rarely think about Leonardo in the context of the fact that it is he who invents the genre of Leonardo's ceremonial secular portrait, a portrait of Leonardo's strictly profile. A quarter or full turn appears when the hero looks at us, looks through us. Well, it's convenient. Well, yes, this is our saint. Petersburg Flora Jackenby. I repeat the proportions of the Gioconda visual difference, but Flora in the 19th century is bought as a Gioconda. There were during his lifetime descriptions of contemporaries who saw him working for Gioconda and left, apparently. It is very easy to describe what could be, but in fact they bought a failed Gioconda and acquired at the same time one of the masterpieces in the Hermitage collection. This is one of the two in the world of the beloved disciple of Mirovich stranded. Melzi was Leonardo's closest student, so much so that with living parents 40 years apart, Leonardo adopts him, so that after Leonardo's death he would inherit all the rich workshop, all the drawings, all the preparatory drawings, all the plans of the artist Melli. He would be the first owner. It was not necessary for me to earn very little picturesquely. Two paintings, in a world where we are sure it is a museum, and here is all this unpleasant detail, all this tenderness, softness of chondra, all this, as we will not see with you 10 years ago. That is, a thick layer of darkened time is literally sealed under it. This is a common misconception. Children's 16th century gloomy works. In general, I really liked everyone. And the owners came out, and the growth of these paintings darkened over time, obscuring the pause, and carried varnish. Aggression was also recorded at the same time. When the municipal restaurateur cleared it, it became interesting to also study the paint. How is it written with what? And the biggest attention was riveted. It pours out very bright. And when they did the analysis on the most, a successful powder has flowed in front of you, with solvents Matashansky lapis lazuli, the stone, which was introduced with small pans on camels from the territory of modern Afghanistan, whereas Italy, delayed red, comes into remission. It's a fortune on the canvas. No ordinary customer could afford anything like this even close to himself. Moreover, the artist apparently orders the painting in the French first, or someone from his immediate entourage. This is the level of the king. That is, it is very expensive, and it is a fortune. You can look at the painting in different ways, through history, through a personal artist, through restoration, and you can literally happen. Now we are going to make the Hermitage. On your left hand there will now be a foyer of the Hermitage Theatre. Since this is a functioning theatre, the performance takes place only with a theatre ticket. We will not be able to enter the Armitage Theatre with you, but we will pass by the foyer. Our next point is the loggias.
A feeling.
Please turn on the flash. There is a reason for such lighting here. When I said that you and I would be inside the painting, I'm not exaggerating, because everything that surrounds us on the walls is genuine, preserved from the 18th century veins. In other words, these are canvases that are stretched on the wall in order to imitate a fresco. Sharply, we will remind you of the painting on the raw casket. That's exactly how, according to the raw casket, Raphael and countless of his students paint the second floor of the BAM Palace to leak. Ekaterina has never been leaking. She got to know these loggias in a different way. We know everything down to the smallest detail. She wrote a pussy with a distance to the interlocutor of the defense of Grimm, and when circumstances arose, it was decided to create an exact copy of Raphael's work in St. Petersburg, but it is called a terrible mood, typical Petersburg weather outside the window. Fine drizzling rain, piercing wind, everyone, of course, understands everything at once. And also unwell, she has a migraine in the morning, and in order to distract herself at least a little, she suddenly remembers. An album with engravings was recently sent from Italy, and the album in our view is 50 by 50 centimeters. Huge, very detailed engravings. They are also not black and white, they painted color, that is, practical photos, and Ekaterina sits down to study them carefully. Could the servant who presented these albums to the Mother Empress, along with her morning coffee, have imagined how it would end? Because carefully study every single engraving, Ekaterina makes the same decision in this situation. Just don't lean on three. It's the 19th century. Well, everything here is very, very serious. Ekaterina makes unity, a logical decision in this situation. She's right. Well, in the end, but not to go to the Vatican. Everything can be made much more comfortable to see it all live. You can order the exact body. An incredible job begins. By order of the Russian Tsarina, forests will be built in the Vatican for 7 years. The best European painters will copy every single painting on canvases inch by inch. Although they are similar, but they are all unique. Each of them is unique. In 10 years, the copying will be completed, and in the same time, a false size will be built, to the size of a repeating Vatican rituals. 55 meters below, 8 meters high, 12 about circular. It's just like in the Vatican. However, with some exceptions. Over these 7 years, the glue in St. Petersburg has not changed to the Vatican one. We still have snow in winter, and it is impossible to afford such luxury as in Italy, when the space between there are children walking, as it was in Italy at that time. Therefore, we have windows on one side and mirrors on the other side. And the principle of the consecrators on the Arnott stairs is that light is reflected in mirrors. There is a spotlight on the ceiling now so that we can examine the subjects of the Old Testament, the so-called Raphael Bible. At that time, of course, there is no backlight, but there is enough light. Believe me, she was here when the ceiling lights were turned off. Practically nothing changes here in principle. The atmosphere becomes a little more languid, nothing more. And here you can really imagine how Catherine walked here, and how she said, "The longer I stay here, the more I like it here." Nothing has changed here since the 19th century. Here the canvases never left their walls. Even during the blockade, the Hermitage staff had a very difficult choice. At the beginning of the war, no one could even imagine. But 902 blockades, but they understood perfectly well. The masterpiece of the Hermitage collection needed to be evacuated. It was already a sad experience. 1914th year has already brought the first evacuation to the museum. So we learned what and in what volumes we need to do. And the director of the Hermitage, Abeli Joseph Gaich, prepared the right number of boxes for the exhibits, which were kept under great secrecy in the cellars of the Hermitage. It was a big secret, because the very idea of preparing for war on the territory of the Soviet Union was equated with a state crime. Nevertheless, everything was ready in the Hermitage. And when the war begins, the first order of the director is to stage and begin evacuation. It's obvious to everyone, I'll have time to clean up everything here. Well, it's just that if we start shooting thick systems, then the crumpled verdict will be signed by other emitter SAID. Therefore, everyone here is covered with sandbags and hope for a miracle. You know, a miracle happened. More than 30 shells, Two Gabobs fall Hermitage cities of the Great Patriotic War, and not a single shell breaks through the roof here. It will destroy everything from the inside. And there wasn't. Yes, the blast wave. There were broken windows. Yes, there was snow on the floor, but you removed the snow. The windows were covered with plywood. But the integrity of the space, this was preserved. And this is a unique space that has not changed since Catherine's time. It has been carefully restored. In the 70s, the former brightness of colors was restored. These paintings can be compared with a fragment of a young restoration. Be sure to insert a fragment during the restoration work, as they say, before and after. These were all the loggias as a whole, and they became so bright with shining contours after the restoration work of the Soviet Restoration School of the Hermitage. This is really a fantastic job, if we also take into account the fact that when restoration work was carried out in the Vatican, and in the Vatican we remember, the loggias were open for a long time. In other words, the wind, the rain, and the scorching Italian sun in general battered the brush of Raphael and his students quite badly. Then, when the Vatican was being restored, they came and compared the damaged fragments with us, because we have a copy according to which the original should be restored. This is also worth a lot. And now we have been walking around the museum for more than an hour. We have come a long way, but in fact, we have not been in the museum yet. We passed four, but palace buildings, and only now we will go into the fifth, actually, in the museum, because the new Hermitage is the first public art museum in the history of the Russian Empire. This is now clearly as possible. You will see how the palace, how the museum is different. And here it really feels. Now we are finally in the museum. Look how things have changed here. Even the acoustics changed, as there was a lot of light air. Everything works according to museum laws here. For us, all these technologies of museum construction seem to have started at the moment when Nicholas I gives an order for the construction of the first public museum in the Russian Empire. He uses the services of the great German architect Leoculation, and at that moment he was already building a Munsk cupola on the catechism of the most modern museums in Europe at that time. Leads to a modern museum. What should the technologies be? There is no contrasting red color of the wall, and it looks very advantageous with a gilded frame. In the 19th century, another exploration of the walls of the Valderrama region was also adopted, because what is the color of the wall could not be the whole of the garden on the ceiling, luxurious decoration, and a huge window, the lumen that gives natural light to the museum hall. This is not a princess. Natural light descends directly from the ceiling. The picture will no longer be made of living fire, candles. Candles are actually also kittens and are not very safe for the museum space. And so the sunlight will illumine it and take into account one small one. And in winter it gets dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we also have snow. In general, we did not have lighting by order. The lamps in this hall will not appear anyway. Until the end of the 19th century, the whole will be illuminated, including candles, when electric lighting appears. The problem will be solved, and if you look closely at the line of light, you will notice another important thing. This is a huge hall. When visitors get here, they naturally get lost. They don't know which way to go, which door to choose, and some doors are false at all. They basically don't open. There are no guides. The servants cannot speak until they are spoken to first. Therefore, in order not to introduce visitors to this awkward situation, you need to set the direction of movement. And here are three of you oldest fixtures. It is stitched, and in fact, is such a direction of movement. That is, guests entering here already subconsciously know which way to go, and they do not get lost in such a huge space. It feels like they are in a museum of a living divorce. Naturally, this is not a decree. It is the conduct of art, because the countertop on which we can admire is the same Badakhshan lapis lazuli. The stone, which is no longer on camels, but was still carried from the territory of modern Afghanistan in small pieces. But lapis lazuli is not found in large volumes in nature, and here the feeling of a countertop from a single base, as if it is carved from a single monolith of stone. How is this possible? If you approach, take a closer look, you will see that these plates of stone are glued very close to each other. Their joints are polished as much as possible, and the effect of a natural stone pattern is created. In other words, the master literally puts the mosaic elements in such a way as to give the impression that this is a natural cut, which in principle does not exist in nature. Russian mosaic technique was passed down from generation to generation, was known only to Russian masters, hence the name. The unique technology was lost after the revolution, but restored by Hermitage restorers relatively recently. Almost 30 years have been spent trying to decipher this technique in all the small details, and now we can say that it is not only a Russian mosaic, maybe a little Hermitage mosaic, because we hope to pass it on from generation to generation already among the Hermitage restorers. But if it's no joke, then, of course, the technology is well known and transmitted within the community. Restorers share their knowledge with each other. Well, it just so happened that it was the Hermitage restorers who discovered it and deciphered its secrets. Although we are happy to share the technique, we are happy to tell all its features. This is a very spectacular, but still imported stone. But the next hall is the most Russian stone. Malachite naturally occurs in long periods. In the 30s of the 19th century, huge deposits of malachite were discovered in the Urals. It is literally a brand of the Russian Empire, and if you have read Bazev's fairy tales, then remember well, some kind of capricious stone, how difficult it is to work with. It does not have a uniform structure. These are always hidden cavities, small volumes, internal caves. A good Ural master can predict these caves, but on a small volume. If we are talking about large volumes of malachite, then this is only the Russian mosaic technique. You will never create a smooth surface out of a large volume of stone, so that this small cave, or a small cavity, does not destroy your idea. Therefore, a simpler stone is taken, from which a vase is made, and malachite plates are glued to the vase in different patterns, creating the effect of the natural surface of the stone. And here there may be an effect of a stone cut. There may be a so-called ribbon ornament that twists around the perimeter, creating the effect of a natural pattern too. This is a unique technology that, once again, was unknown in Europe, and exactly the same base was presented by Nicholas I to Queen Victoria as such a diplomatic gift, with a broad gesture. And now let's take the diplomatic gift out of the brackets and decipher everything else. Malachite at that time was almost equal in price to 1 kilogram of gold, 1 kilogram of malachite. It is almost a gem, although it is not. The base weighs more than 2 tons in total. And now we remember again that the technology is unknown in Europe. That is, almost 2 tons of malachite are sent to London with the light hand of the Russian Tsar. This of course causes an incredible reaction. It is still a pride with the royal collection. However, Nicholas I chose this vase from among those that stood in his living quarters as an interior decoration. Well, the good mood passed. The emperor looked at the empty place after a while, ordered to make a new base, so that the composition would be restored to the same as it is now in the room, and meet the original sample of this very batch. The hall we are in is dedicated to the Italian arts of the 17th-18th century, a picture of the largest formats. They were written for the appropriate size of interiors. They were written naturally, not by one person. Each painting has its own author, its own artist, but it is also a huge workshop around him. It's a lot of layers of painting. It's a lot of details, a lot of extra work. We have a gorgeous series of 6 paintings, written for the Palace of the Dauphin in Venice. This Italian artist Giovanni Battista Paul works at the turn of the 17th-18th centuries. I understand how you can study Baroque painting from a textbook. As we have seen the Baroque in architecture, The Baroque in painting is also a complex composition, volumes, a very complicated space. I'll show you just one picture. The triumph of the commander Mania Curia Dota. I will not load you with historical details. I will tell you just a few facts. The commander defeated the king of the feast and was considered invincible. He was the nephew of Alexander the Great. He had one of the strongest armies. The main driving force of this army were elephants. Elephants are timid animals. They were afraid of a hail of arrows that flew in their direction. They ran back. They started trampling their own troops. And the commander took advantage of this opportunity. Actually, the outcome of the battle was a foregone conclusion, and several elephants were captured during the battle. And now the process itself is moving towards the Eternal City. The Romans, meeting their commander, had never seen elephants in their lives before. Apparently, the artist too, because that image of an elephant on soft, cat-like paws. We sit with a very long trunk, like a vacuum cleaner, with a small head, with huge ears, but completely out of proportion on his torso. Agree, not very similar to a real elephant. But you must agree, because we went out to see Nina the elephant. And if I hadn't focused my attention on this, then we wouldn't have paid attention to this egoism. It wouldn't have aroused much interest. We would pay attention, first of all, to the scale of the canvas. We immediately wondered how one person could write this. And how? What kind of picture is painted? It is placed horizontally. It is hung, or a fox is lined up in front of it. Here is the second option is preferable, that there is not a single character here who is at rest. Absolutely everything is moving here. Here standards are evolving. Here clouds are racing across the sky. And this technique is very popular for the Baroque. 1 second, a captured moment. In other words, imagine that this is not a painting, but a film that has been put on pause. And we are well aware that now someone will click on the invisible play, and the action will continue. But we just got caught for 1 second. And they also caught her so a little clumsily, but as if you move the camera a little to the side, and there too. The composition continues, and also people are standing both on the right and on the left. And the painting is literally artificially cut off by the canvas frames. The frame quality of the image, the captured moment, everything is in motion, and there are a lot of deceptions and illusions. Here the composition is arranged in such a way that no matter what part of the hall you are in, and if you look at the elephant, you get the impression that it is coming in your direction. In other words, it's literally turning on you right now. I understand perfectly well that I am now saying exactly what all the guides say about one painting in their museum, where a character turns to you with a strange look in your direction. Well, in general, some kind of interaction with the audience is happening, but optics was not invented in the 20th and not in the 21st century. And an artist who works with the Baroque, he must be able to do it. He is obliged to create the sky in such a way as to give the impression that this is really a heavenly dream. He should paint the door so that she wants to reach out and open it. Well, or write an elephant in such a way that it will turn after you. In general, the artist should play a little with the viewer. These are responsibilities. From the hole with the secular we all live, we move on to the Spanish Enlightenment. We will talk later. To begin with, I'm going to ask you to turn around the entire hall and take a single look at the entire space of this hall. And I'll say a few words about the bedroom, which becomes Catholic in the 17th century. There, only those that will come to Europe in the 16th year are being formed. And there is always one in painting. And if the decorations of the luxurious fathers are the Soviet court, then you are the title of decorations of Catholic rites. Marriage dark images, lost images of saints. Vladimir Rash of the 17th century, who painted paintings on everyday topics. Stories are always interesting and affectionate, and no matter what textbook on the theory of history we send, there will always be a mention of the Bodegon style. Translated from Spanish, this is an inn or a tavern. In fact, this is the essence of style. That is, all the action takes place in this very inn. There are 3 people sitting at the table in this inn. Here the picture shines a little, Plus, it has darkened a lot over time. We remember with you that varnish changes the perception of painting. We are very much waiting for the restoration. We are very much waiting for the painting to clear. It will become the same bright red plane again. Now we need to decipher who is in front of us. The old man is clearly puzzled about something. His eyebrows are raised. It's obvious. The wrinkles are very well drawn. The boy is laughing. He is happy with life. He has a bottle in his hands, perhaps with wine. We will not quote on this for now. And the young man, here he is completely coming from what is happening. There is no fourth person. This is a hat that hangs on a nail, and a collar hangs next to it. These traditions are absolutely utilitarian. The Spanish nobles entering the inn, even if it was the most infamous place, did not take off their collar, so that during the meal it was simply banal not to get dirty. Next to the hat and collar hangs a sword. She's alone. The second is the shadow of the sword, and this tells us that one of these three at the table, this person is pushing. He has the right to bear arms. Then we make a simple conclusion. The one who doesn't have a pen is the person who belongs in the park. Then we start poking nothing at all. There are three people sitting at the table, but a table with a server for one person. Why did such a motley company gather behind her? In a word, that they actually forgot about each other. Because, well, a child and a young man next to an old man are not very condemned. So there are two versions of what I'm going to depict here. On the one hand, this is an illustration. The parables of the Havre novel, quite common at that moment, are rather about two crooks who got hooked on a gullible old man, an impoverished nobleman, and tell him in two voices, they say, about not his servant, and he was once their faithful master. They served him faithfully and truly. Well, it's kind of embarrassing for the old man to say that he doesn't remember them, and maybe he really is already being deceived by his senile soldering. So he agrees to share his modest meal with them, so the meal is broken. This is the first and most banal version. The second one is deeper. It does not cancel the previous one. This is an illustration of three different ages in a person's life, three different relationships in life at this age, and, quite possibly, at the age of one person. One of you begins to count with the thumb. This one person is Velasquez himself, because this is his self-portrait. Diego and Lasky are depicted in this sand-colored jacket. He is 19 years old, and he sits exactly as a person would sit who looks at his reflection in the mirror when he writes his own self-portrait. In the Prada Museum, there are self-portraits in Weasel. We compared them, made a very logical conclusion, and the boy is also a well-known character. This is his apprentice. This is a boy who appears in 3 or 4 paintings. They are also in the Prada Museum, and the boy is here. Well, make an allowance for the fact that the varnish has slightly modified the contrasts of his face. He smiles quite naturally. And now remember at least one portrait, where the character in the picture will also smile like this for all 32 hours. Well, I'm almost sure that nothing immediately comes to mind, because for an artist, a lively natural smile is a challenge. Why? Because it is necessary to make the model smile for several hours. And if you ask yourself, or someone from your entourage, to smile at your finds, your face will convulse, and you will not get an animal grin. And most often, artists did exactly that in their paintings, where Igor Lasks remembered the smile and wrote from memory. Therefore, we take into account that the contrast is changed here. But if it were all exactly in the form in which he writes in Weasels, it is, of course, very large. A very big achievement received. Well, you also need to pay attention to the little things here. For example, a tablecloth. How's the tablecloth? Tell me. She is on any still life, which cannot be particularly any. Carefully debugged and deployed creases debugging is still to blame. But all the guests who settled at the table in the tavern, leaving, rubbed their hands, and this is all on a strip of fabric left, or the knife that's lying on the table. He is the point inside the picture, and the blade is already in our reality. It seems that we will stretch out our hand, maybe we will take it from the table, not directly, but such a 3D effect is very difficult in the creator's painting. So what kind of picture is this then? So many layers of meanings, such a complex technique, such a plot. This is Velasco's thesis. He is 19 years old. He has completed his training in the workshop of his teacher. He starts his scenic journey. He wants to prove it. I can do everything, and even more. Notice me, and he was noticed. 19 here, 24 here already. At the age of 24, he became the first painter of the Spanish king, and no longer writes compositions in style. He paints the king and his inner circle, ceremonial, court portraits. The artist had to say goodbye to his free life, but he has to pay for his career, concluding our conversation, having lived. In other words, we are talking about just one artist, the most important one. This is the artist with whom the first paintings begin. The artist of the 17th century, one of the world's main artists and the best man. And the forces are already leaving. There is a postdoc there. There is also here. Hair. It's enough. I'm not shy. And this breakthrough needs to start from afar. For example, to say that he works in 17th century Holland. This country is unusual, not a monarchy, but a republic, not a Catholic country, but a Protestant one. What does politics and religion have to do with it? Juice, that's the most direct. This is the customer's figure. Only if you hit the rest of Europe, order the second one closest to it. In Spain, they ordered a Catholic church. These are the two most informative customers. In Holland, there is neither one nor the other country, because the victor in the terrible, and because the Protestant in the white wall, as there is no place to paint. Judging, the artist must be very poor, but he is rescued by an ordinary citizen, a burgher. And this burgher, he's in his living room on the Amsterdam Canal embankment in a small house. But he does not want to see Christian martyrs and saints over the fireplace. And antique plots are no longer very interesting. And three genres of painting are interesting. These are still life, landscape, and portrait. And the portrait becomes the most popular, probably, of the purchased genres of painting. Only here is some kind of portrait. The portrait is very substantial. The artist is required to prescribe the fabric, prescribe the texture, prescribe the accessories of clothing, that is, through the portrait to show status and wealth. Therefore, Dutch portraits, if you recall, are abstract images. They are very finely painted. There are a lot of small details. There is all the emphasis on the fabric, on the fact, on the status of a person. And Rembrandt paints his portraits in a completely different way. He writes us a scientist or an official. We do not know exactly who this portrait is, not signed, and is not mentioned in his. There is no information about who it was intended for, and he doesn't prescribe fabrics. He transfers our status of our very rich person in a completely different way. Through what? Through the hands. The sleek, thin, senile skin of the hands of a man who has never done physical work in his life. And a sharp look. A person was distracted from work. He turns around. He continues to finish the work with his hands, and looks at us in surprise that you are going to look at him so attentively. And here are such lively, natural, in a cut moment portraits with such an unusual angle becomes very popular. And Revend is a very rich artist. At the peak of his creativity, he receives for one work an amount equivalent to the annual income of a university professor. He is very rich. He is getting married very successfully. His wife is the heiress of the richest patrician family, and here on this phrase you just want to catch something unworthy. For example, do not be afraid to assume a marriage according to calculation, and she is not the first beauty of Holland of the 17th century. Well, let's be honest. The appearance, well, even the owner confirms that there is really something wrong with her. Her appearance is more childish than immaculately beautiful. One ray of her portraits. But if you look closely at this portrait, but you can see how I am, how he admires her. This is one of the most beautiful love stories in painting. He spreads her soft hair over her shoulder. He puts a wreath on her head like a crown. He paints her in the image of a goddess. Any artist will paint his wife because they very rarely use the services of models and very often invited members of their family to pose for a picture. Why pay a model if you have a beloved wife? Any artist will paint his wife. Such a loving artist will paint her in the image of a goddess. This is the goddess Flora. We have already seen the interpretation of this image once, but here is Flora, or rather Sesuk, in the costume of Flora. Because after all, first of all he writes it, and he prescribes every golden thread of this fabric, well, because he bought these fabrics himself. This is his personal collection, and the marriage will be very happy, and they live in a big way. Ram is with a simple miller. He does not know how to manage money. He spends too much, and the ratio of expenses and income is not always understood. After 9 years of family union, Sesuk dies. We don't know from what, but apparently consumption, tuberculosis. Here, in fact, the most common version is exactly like this. Of the 4 children, only 2 will live to adulthood. Rembrandt does not moderate his expenses. As a result, he collects a huge amount of debts and loans, pays for them at the end of his life, and practically slides into poverty. The end of life will be completely inglorious, although paintings will continue to be bought and paid for as before a fortune, and he will gradually be forced to sell his huge collection of paintings, and sells out as well. And he sells, among other things, the famous donut, which he does not write for a specific customer. At least, there are no mentions of customers either. It is quite possible for themselves to decorate their interior. He writes in the image of Dan and his wife. And pay attention, this is not an antique beauty. Here is a Dutch folk beauty, according to the ideas of the beauty of that time. And this story is about an ancient princess, whom her father locks in a dungeon deep underground. What would he do so terrible? And she didn't do anything. She was born with a girl, and with the girl she became a wonderful woman. And the father had a terrible prophecy that he would die around his own grandson. Well, what makes such a situation? Of course, with a daughter, do not give birth to the opportunity, and so he locks his daughter in a dungeon deep underground, so that even sunlight does not penetrate there, literally in a golden cage. And the old maidservant will make sure that the most terrible thing does not happen day and night. The old lady of the maids, of course, did not catch up, and, of course, Zeus found out about the magnificent beauty of the girl, and descended into her in the form of rain and gold coins. And the legend says, no, says Roman, in the form of a golden light. It will be significantly poetic. This golden light penetrates into the space of her room. Even the old lady looks out to see what happened, and she holds out her hand in this light, and it seems to pull away, but it's still scary. After all, the deity appears before. Look at how the perimeters of the picture are worked out. What is only worth it? He's crying, and his hands are tied. He just brings us back to this story, because this is a hint that it is forbidden to love Dan, and he can't do anything about it, and therefore his hands are tied. But the figure itself is given as if a lubricant, as if in a light haze. And now this is no longer the picturesque polisher of Cremont. This is a terrible tragedy that happened to this painting in the 20th century, 1985 year. A man whose name we never call excursions. It doesn't matter that the name doesn't sound here anymore. He comes to the Hermitage on a day off. That this is a beautiful legend, they say, will ask what is the most expensive painting here. Nothing like that. He knows exactly where he's going. He pours Benner with acid and strikes her several times. But he will change several versions later. He will tell that she called him and talked to him. He will say that it was his political protest. He will offer a lot of things to the court as an excuse. It doesn't really matter. And it matters that Donavi will be restored for 12 years. And the first reactions, when they see the crazy mess that has become with the picture after this terrorist attack. The first reaction will be that they cannot be saved, and even the head of the easel painting restoration department will refuse this work with one phrase: I am not Rambo. I will not rewrite Dan. That's it. The painting is lost. But a long analysis of the paint showed that no one would rewrite Dan. It will be fixed on the layer that the acid did not have time to burn. Remo rewrote this picture many times and created an airbag for it, and the acid burned the upper layers. This is where I started working with the painting. This is what I managed to save. This is a unique story. Usually it is impossible to see this layer, except in X-rays of the completion of restoration. It is usually shown all the stages of restoration, show how the picture was photographed, and found out all this. And in this case it was saved. There are still traces of acid visible, as it burned through this picture, but it was managed to be preserved in integrity. And if you ask me now, which is about the same expensive painting, this question often arises on excursions. Then if you answer it really seriously, then yes, because on the one hand, this is one of the best paintings from the renovation, and on the other hand, this is a painting that has received a rebirth thanks to the fantastic work of the Hermitage restorer, who, millimeter by millimeter restores this painting, literally bringing it back to life. Now, of course, it is under armored glass, but quite often people ask, why can't all the paintings be covered with glass then? Why it is impossible to secure the museum so much that no one, even the most insane person, could harm you, but, probably, this is the fine line when, on the one hand, the best preservation of the museum is a glass niche that stands right at the entrance to the museum and does not let anyone in, and 100% safety. On the other hand, not everyone knows the safety of glass in terms of their safety. It is not always possible. Therefore, we try to maintain a delicate balance, to talk about the fact that painting is much more important than momentary ideas, momentary hobbies, some political protests. But once in the Hermitage Museum, it will be absolutely impossible not to talk about the main topic of finishing your biography, finishing your creative path, and the return of the prodigal son. Therefore, we will put the last point exactly on the scene that Rameau begins to paint a few years before his death, and this is not at all the last work of art, but a kind of means of such spiritual searches, which at the end of Rembrandt's life acquires some kind of, well, just manic passion. He studies the Bible, he studies its mystical currents, he tries to delve into bondage, he tries to find answers to the questions of his life through the Bible. He tries to understand what was done wrong at the beginning of life, what he pays for in the end, how can you atone for these sins? And he grabs this plot from the New Testament as a straw. A story about forgiveness, a story about redemption, a story about a father and two sons. The younger son turns to his father with an unforgivable request. "Father, I don't want to wait for my death. I want to receive the inheritance now. Give me what's rightfully mine, and I won't wait for you to die." And the father agrees to this unforgivable request and gives him exactly half of the inheritance. And then everything is according to the laws of the genre. The eldest son, here he stands in red clothes, he remains next to his father, continues to work on the family farm. The youngest son takes the half he has read and goes on a journey. Well, during the trip, he will spend, lose. Every last penny will be at the lowest point of poverty. The once rich young man is now forced to herd pigs. Pigs are dirty animals. You couldn't touch them before. Now he lives with them in the same bread. For joy, he perceives the food that he gives the pig. Even at some point, he bitterly remembers that he lives worse than a slave. That slave who? Those slaves who lived in the same house with him and helped him and his brother work on the farm. And of course he can't go home anymore. He betrayed his old father. He turned away from him for money. He committed a terrible betrayal. It is not forgiven, and he decides on a very humiliating gesture. He will be asked to return to his native house as a slave, and maybe in this way his father will accept him, and he will be able to earn through humiliating work to atone for his guilt. And with this thought, he returns home, and his father will receive him, the dearest guest. He will order to bring the best clothes, shoes, find the stage of the fattest calf, slaughter, and arrange a luxurious feast. The feast in honor of the son's return home very often depicts this plot. The artists emphasized this feast, and he distracts attention from the essence. From how half-blind the father is, he does not see, he feels his son, to make sure that it is he who has returned to him. Very detailed detail. The son was in such a hurry to rush to his father's feet that he almost lost his shoes on the way, and does not notice it. His clothes are torn to shreds. His head is almost devoid of hair. He is seriously ill, and he sincerely apologizes, and the father accepts this appeal, despite the fact that the eldest son is standing next to him, and he has only one question on his lips. "Father, how is that? After all, it's fiercely deserved, this luxurious feast. I deserve your love. After all, I am your firstborn. I am your beloved son. I've been by your side all this time. I've never left you. In all this time, you haven't even slaughtered a lamb in my honor, and your youngest son returns, who betrayed you, turned away from you, gets everything. Why such an injustice?" His father explains to him. "And all this time he was by my side, and you were alive for me as a son. But your younger brother turned away from me, and he died for me as a son. And now he is on his knees in front of me, and sincerely asks for forgiveness. Why am I sure I'm sincere? Because I see how. Because he sees how ready I am to accept him. And I do the most difficult thing for myself. I sincerely forgive him. And this story is not only about the ability to ask for forgiveness, which is sometimes very difficult, and even more difficult to sincerely forgive. This is a story about God. This is a plot, a parable from the New Testament, that it is God who will accept a person as a father at any moment, no matter when a person turns to him. It may seem to the person himself that it is too late, there is no time left for prayer. This plot tells a different story, that there is always time, that the Lord is always ready to take a person into his arms. For Rem, this becomes a very important plot. He paints this picture very emotionally. There are no small details anymore. With large strokes, first with a brush, then with a brush, it moves to the end of the brush, literally scratching some elements. At some point, the tool understands not everything can be expressed. He finishes the bare heel of his son's left foot with his fingers. He literally puts his whole soul into this work. And a few months later, according to most reports, a few months after finishing work on this painting, the artist himself dies, and it becomes a very emotional canvas for him, largely because it is also a story about the last dialogue between a father and son, the dialogue that Rembrandt didn't have. At the age of 26, having survived his own father for a very short time, his beloved son, the heir Titus, dies, the same son that Sassouk was pregnant with in the portrait. You might have noticed that your beloved spouse is in an interesting position. She is stroking her tummy, and she is carrying their son under her heart. And this story is also about this dialogue, and about the body of his father at home, which Rinat did not have at the end of his life. And now imagine that the picture is hanging 1.5 meters below, and the horizon line on the canvas is aligned with our horizon line. Of course, I don't want to say that we can literally go inside the picture, but the feeling of psychological balance between our world and the world of the canvas creates the feeling that not only a few people in the picture are watching this scene, but you and I continue this circle, and in the center of this circle, kneeling in the prodigal son, his father hugs him. Psychologically, a very strong piece of music that will sound completely different to you in different lighting conditions, at different distances, and with your different emotional state. On such a large-scale note in every sense, we can say with you that we are ending the conversation about painting for today. We go down to the first floor. Temperature.
Come on.
Let's ground ourselves literally in the sense of the word, literally and figuratively, because on the first floor, and, as was customary in the 19th museum, in the 19th century, the museum is always divided into two levels. On the second floor, The painting is as modern as possible, or very close to the time of the creation of the museum. On the first floor of antiquity, on the first floor of the left complex, let me remind you once again, the chief architect of the new Hermitage is building, on the orders of the first space, building this hall as similar as possible to the Chechnik, and from the moment of its creation in the middle of the 19th century to the present time, nothing has changed in this hall. Literally, here the showcases are made, here the painting on the walls of this bag, here the ceiling resembles a puppy. The intersection of balls. Initially, this hall was originally a priest, which was called a colored vase, black-laped red lacquer vessels, a unique collection, which now has more than 7,000 fans, not only in this hall, but also took a magnificent collection. A collection of antique U. I will show you the base with special pride. A unique exhibit. There are no analogues in the World Museum collections of this hydra. It's a water vessel. A hydra with 3 handles, 2 in order to lift up, but the jug has such vessels to pour out the water, but smaller. Greek women were put on their shoulders, lifted on their heads. So the water was transferred to the dwelling. Only the key here is smaller. It's 65 centimeters tall. Quite dense, thick ceramics, voluminous decor, stucco relief here, which is surprisingly preserved. There is incredible safety, incredible quality of work. But such a vessel full of water is not like a Greek woman. It's not the first time a young man will raise it to Greek. This vessel has never been utilitarily used. These are vessels for ritual celebrations, including in honor of the goddess Demeter. She, among other gods, is located on hangers, and note that here the figures of the gods are painted. The paint has been preserved here, and antique white marble statues were also painted. They were not white marble in ancient Greece. We perceive them as white because the paint has not been preserved on the stone, but initially they were as bright as the figures of the gods on the shoulders of the vase here, and the faces of these statues were gilded, and the hair was sprinkled with golden pollen, and they were put on jewelry, luxurious earrings and necklaces, and wreaths of flowers were placed on their heads. They really were objects of admiration and adoration. Therefore, in this case, you can study how the ancient statues looked like for such an amazing preservation. This nipple is called the Cuman Hydra, or Regina of the Eyes, the Queen of You. This is really its official name, for its unique appearance, for its fantastic preservation. It is quite logically so called. But there are vases in the Hermitage of the Queen, and the second one gets its name according to the old Moscow tradition. We should have everything royal if we have the biggest gun. This is the Tsar cannon. If the biggest bell. This is the Tsar bell. So if there is the largest vase in the world, it is in the imitator. Then it should be what? That's right, the queen vase. This is the Kolevin bowl. Let's go meet her. But agree, really royal. The largest bowl is made of green. The stone is very difficult on the one hand. On the other hand, it's incredible what you're talking about. That one awkward movement in processing can go cracking. From the Petrovsky rivers. There, a stone processing factory finds an incredible nugget, and from the moment it was found in the garden to the moment when a completely finished bowl checks all the water from Barnaul comes to St. Petersburg and is installed here in the hall. 25 minutes pass, and, looking at this vase, I asked 2 questions. As it turned out, and why did she do it? Well, That's the first question you can easily answer. The fact is that when this base is installed here and a separate foundation is made, I reveal here a lot of sewing in the format of construction and finishing the derivative. And here is something that will never fit again. Ah, because you have me. The incredible size of Kamenogorod beauty makes a work of art. But it is also important to note that the new Hermitage is being built. The initial response is that there will be a sub-operator, and it is important to meet the first guests of the museum, which in fact is also elegant. That's some kind of unique work of art by the best high-end artists. Something that always takes care that, in general, the main entrance has been changed. We can say that since the beginning of the tour, we have coped with you. The main masterpieces of Friends. We are in a warm state today. We have come a long way. Now let's go up. A small elevation has been introduced, so many sides of the exit. We liked you. We have come a long way in these 2 hours. In the same way as showing it so that it does not freeze. And we overcame this tail transition today. When they left the hall with the clock, the peacocks went to get acquainted with the painting. They are located here. They hang 4 hours. These semicircular windows. These are the windows of the former stables and the manege, where horses were kept until 1928th year. First the imperial stables, then the stables belonging to the museum. We've come full circle, all 5 buildings. From Novgorod, we return back to winter. Above us now there will be a sleeping garden and a grand railway station. Pay attention to how the restored plaster of the freedom of the arena showers also makes an impression. When you need to look literally at the history at your fingertips, how it was all done, and initially work.
How many ashes have not been shown to us yet? Something is connected with Egypt. Is it a border?
Well, actually, that's all. We are great fellows with you. We have come a long way. We walked for exactly 2 hours. Almost the clock can be checked. We got acquainted with the chef structure. We heroically got acquainted with decorative and applied art from 10%. Natasha, huge. You can come back here endlessly. Each time you will discover it for yourself in a new way. Look at the already famous exhibits with new eyes. The collection fulfills why you are incredibly excited. We are now at the Exposition of Ancient Egypt, and just one phrase in this exhibition already characterizes all the collections. We also took them together. This phrase sounds like this: that the Gleb collection is not even very modest. There are only 7,000 exhibits, but in contrast to 3 million, 7,000 is literally a drop. Nevertheless, I already suggest that you get acquainted with this wonderful collection yourself. I invite you to the Hermitage again and again, and it's very nice to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.
If there are any questions about your disposal, the most important question that everyone is embarrassed to ask is how to get out of here. Let me explain right away so that you don't become new employees. Indeed, it turns out on the combination at the entrance. And there we got acquainted. Our tour began there. And this is relevant only for those who had a wardrobe there, who had a wardrobe down the stairs, who wanted to turn to the right from the side of the palaces and the solid, to go through the path of the field we were walking, and turn to the left. That is, it will turn out.
To the side? Thank you very much. Well, all friends, that's how our tour went. Thanks for watching. It's been a long way to shoot this in one shot. It was very hard. It's just that my hand is already drying up. So with you like, subscribe, and you wait for new videos. With you was Oleg Hive Tomav. Bye everyone.